Here today for the interview is Jennifer Abrams. Jennifer is an internationally recognized leader and expert on new teacher employee support, having hard conversations, collaboration skills, and being your best adult self at work. Jennifer presents at annual conferences both in North America, but also literally throughout the world. Her books include Having Hard Conversations, The Multi-Generational Workplace, Hard Conversations Unpacked, Swimming in the Deep End, and her latest book, Stretching Your Learning Edges, Growing Up at Work. Jennifer has been recognized as one of 21 women all K-12 educators need to know by Education Week's Finding Common Ground blog. So today we're going to focus on having difficult conversations and how we can ready ourselves for what is inevitably going to be an uncomfortable and sometimes awkward moment. So Jennifer, I want to welcome you to the Tom Schimmer podcast.
I am so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, great. I'm glad you're here. It's great to reconnect. We connected years ago at a conference, and this is a great excuse to reconnect with you and talk about something that I think a lot of educators let's just say a lot of adults dread, which are those hard conversations that inevitably come up, and we all try to figure out how to avoid them, and we can't avoid them. So we'll get into that as we go. But as we begin today, I want to start with a couple of things. First, walk us through the professional biography, right? You started as a high school English teacher in Palo Alto. And then the second part is, how did difficult conversations become an area of expertise and an area of focus?
I was a high school English teacher, as you just mentioned, in Palo Alto, California, here in the States for a decade. And I then went into new teacher coaching. So I spent 16 years in a public school system with new teacher coaching after my work in the classroom. And when I moved from the classroom into the central office or the school board, I learned how to coach, right? Because you have to learn how to do the work. But then I realized that beyond that, it was really actually interesting. I have a credential in how to teach students the subject of English. I don't have a credential on how to talk effectively to adults. Nothing in my credential program got anywhere near that need for collaboration. And I also needed coaching. So I learned how to coach, and then I was leading teams. And so I learned more about facilitation. And that seemed to make sense, as you're developing and working in the central office. Moving into that role, though, was a moment where I noticed that I wanted to advocate for things, that I noticed there might be some things that were not being spoken of. And I kept thinking, I've got to learn how to speak up around what matters. And I looked in education, and I laughed, and I still kind of laugh, because if there's anything around having hard conversations in education, it's how to deal with a difficult employee or a difficult parent. The other person is always difficult. And I thought, I'm not so sure that's true. I'm actually wanting to stand on my side of the net and figure out how to find my voice around what matters and in a challenging moment. So that's where, as a coach, working with teachers, working with department heads as well as principals, I realized we all needed to learn how to have hard conversations. So I wrote myself a workbook, and that was like 12 years ago that I wrote that. And I've been thinking about it now for over a decade. Yeah. People still need to know how to have a hard conversation.
They always seem to come up, that's for sure. And you bring up such a good point, because we do always think that it's the other people that are being difficult. It's the other people that are getting in the way. And we may at times need to look in the mirror and realize that we might be the one that everyone else has to have a difficult conversation with as well. So how do I know that I'm just, before we get into some scenarios, because I'm going to run some scenarios by you and just talk about how we might prepare for those conversations. But I'm thinking more generally right now, like, how do I know that I'm headed for a difficult conversation? And here's what I mean by that. It's really easy to kind of get in our heads and make a meal out of every potential conversation, right? These conversations often don't live up to the hype that we've created in our heads. So I'm wondering how I can separate the yes, this is definitely going to be a difficult conversation, from the ones that might be more of a figment of my imagination? How do I separate those two?
So I think that we and meet our our affective filter goes up. We get defensive in a lot of moments, and it could be something that's really about a trigger in us. It could be a pet peeve of ours. So I always have to ask myself the question: is this educationally or professionally unsound? Is this physically unsafe?
Hmm.
Or is this emotionally damaging? And what's the severity of that? Has it been a pattern? And do I really want to say something because of that? So I then, if I kind of go through that kind of, balancing it, has this happened before? Is it still educationally unsound? Is the kid still learning that 2 + 2 is 10? Should I speak up? You know what I mean? Like, I
Right.
think I need to say something in certain moments. Um, I then ask, and I apologize if you're hearing my lovely state and city fire engines there. Um, the I then have to ask myself, and I think we'll talk about this later because it continues to be the thing. Is this something that we've all agreed to? Is this a norm that has been breached? Is this something that this person continually doesn't do? Maybe I do need to speak up about this because it's really been on the plate. We've agreed to it and it hasn't happened. And then I think I want to have the conversation. But for me, I always have to ask myself, is this really a problem or is this a pet peeve of mine? And how do I want to have this conversation? It doesn't really need to be a hard conversation. And I have a set of questions in chapter 3 of the first book that really are for me a speed bump. They're just stop. Is this really a hard conversation? Have you thought about, and if you're going to say yes, have you thought about the timing of it? Have you thought about the language of it? Have you thought about whether you've had clarity around it? Have you talked about the doability? And it just keeps you thinking, and you finally go, you know what? This doesn't need to happen. This was all my pet peeve. You know what I mean? Or this is just all on me. Or I think I need to go back and clear. So there's so many things that I think need to happen in your head when everybody wants to just do ready, fire, they're wrong, blah, 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 blah. And so I want you to pause and ask
Yeah.
yourself some of those questions.
Yeah, that's it's always good advice, it seems, to pause and think through. The questions themselves are great questions, but the fact that you're actually going through that whole process really does cause you to pause and take inventory on where you are with that conversation. It just seems like whenever you emotionally respond in the moment, it can backfire so easily on you. So I appreciate the idea of just thinking through whether or not I really need to have this conversation, or is it something that with 24 hours, with 48 hours may have passed. So
Yeah.
I want to walk you through some scenarios and have you provide some advice on how we can prepare ourselves for these difficult conversations, right? So I want to talk first about difficult conversations where the power balance is tilted away from you, right? So you're a classroom teacher. You've gone, let's just assume that you've gone through the protocols you were talking about, that you've gone through the questions and
Yep.
you've thought it through 48 hours. Yep, I need to have this conversation. Maybe you're a classroom teacher and your principal said something publicly at a faculty meeting, or you're a principal and you need to have an uncomfortable conversation with your superintendent, right? So, what are some ways when the power balance is tilted away from you? What are some ways that we can prepare ourselves to have that conversation with that person who is, I suppose, up the chain of command, to put it that way?
So I know people get really anxious about this because who are you to have this conversation? This is your boss.
Right.
I actually think if you know that this was educationally or professionally unsound or emotionally damaging to you, to the team, you really do want to have that conversation because you are speaking on behalf of the district, the board, the team. And when you do that, you need to do some planning. And I ask people to consider when they're going to have a hard conversation up, and I'll talk about the planning of the conversation and then the scripting of it. When you're
Sure.
going to plan that conversation up, what do you want to talk about? Do you know what you want to say in a humane and growth producing way? What's the challenge? Can you shape that? Can you frame it? Then, and this is what's really bothersome to some people because they just get really anxious about this. The person that you're talking to, your superior, your boss, is probably going to ask you, well, what do you want me to do differently? What do you think we should do instead? And you should have some suggestions.
Hmm.
And I have people who are like, I can't tell my boss what to do. They're the boss. And I say, I promise you that they're going to say, and what do you think we should do about it? What do you think I should have done differently? And for you to be more successful, you need to have some suggestions. Notice that I've actually said the word suggestion. I've not said expectation, demand, here's how it should have gone. This is what you should have done. This is how it should go. I think that you should offer them as suggestions or recommendations or ideas, because there is that power dynamic. Should you have some ideas? The answer is yes. Should you offer them in a way that's suggestive and honoring of the other person's position? Yes. But people forget that they should bring the suggestion because I can't tell them what to do. They're the supervisor. And I will let you know that chances are in those moments, they too will seek out and then maybe modify your suggestions, but they will seek your ideas and you have a greater likelihood of getting your idea across if you have an idea.
Right.
And I know that that's
Right.
weird.
Yeah.
But you can't just go, I just think they're going to know. I just need to tell them that wasn't okay. And they'll figure it out. I don't think that's as growth producing as we possibly fear or believe. I just think we need to have some ideas.
Yeah. As somebody who has worked in both school administration at the district level as well, I think, the vast majority, I mean, there is always the possibility that someone has malicious intent, but the vast majority have made the decision to act in a certain way because they think that was the most favorable course of action. So
Right.
the idea of them having a Rolodex or a file, in their head full of different responses, I think is a reach. And I love the suggestion, the idea of coming with a suggestion or helping, because as a leader, you want to be able to grow. You want to understand. Maybe you're not aware of how what you said impacted people or how it influenced the morale of the faculty. So I think that's great advice. What about in the other direction? What about when the power balance is kind of tilted in your favor? So now you're the principal, and of course you have positional authority, and maybe a faculty member at a staff meeting was offside, or the same idea. You're the superintendent, and you've got to have a conversation with the principal. And obviously, the easiest thing to do in those situations is just lean on your title and have the conversation in a way. But how do you approach that conversation when the power balance is in your favor without just leveraging your professional or positional authority? How do you go about that?
I would say two things. Well, yeah. I would do the exact same thing that I just mentioned for having a hard conversation up. I would plan it, and I would presume positive intent, just like you mentioned, and say, I want to think this through. What is the problem I want to talk to this person about? And have I been clear about the expectations before I have this conversation? Because hard conversations, I think we jump into hard conversations when we could have clarifying conversations. If you are the principal and you're like, that person is just not on board with this initiative, I will say, raise your right hand and swear to me that you were clear about what the expectations were, that they had training, that they have it in writing, that you know that they are, from your opinion, willfully just disregarding, all of this stuff. And if you cannot raise your right hand and swear to me that all of that clarity has been there, then you need to have a clarifying conversation. When you then go, no, Jennifer, she was at every single workshop, she went to everything and she isn't doing it, then you can have a hard conversation. But then I'm even going to push you and say, what would it look like and sound like if she was more successful? I want you to paint a picture for yourself, because the person will say to you, well, what do you want me to do? I don't know what to do. And I don't have the, and you're going to need to do that. Those two things. Have you been humane and really been clear with the person? And are you growth producing? And painting a picture and providing support to help that person. Those two things help you not lean on your positional power, but put you in a humane and growth producing space. Because if you weren't there and a new principal came in, they would have to have the same conversation. And we want to do it in a growth path. People will say to me, I can't believe I have to spoon feed. I'm not spoon feeding this adult who should know better. And I will say, do you want to be right or effective?
Right.
And how would you like to support this person? Because you're not trying to lean on that, but you're being the instructional leader.
Right.
So promise me you've done all that. And then you're not leaning on the position. You just happen to be in the position that has authority, but you are there to support on behalf of the kids.
Jumping to conclusions seems to be a habit that many of us form, right? And the idea that it probably would be a good idea to have those clarifying conversations with students as well, right? Because they may not have been clear on directions or expectations, and we in our mind think we were clear, and maybe we were, but at the same time, there are times where things get lost in translation, and having those clarifying conversations, because we may be jumping to conclusions, overreacting, and the idea, what I'm hearing you say throughout these scenarios so far is that no matter how difficult these conversations are, that our goal is to really emerge having grown from the experience. And I think that's such a powerful mindset to bring into a conversation that is going to be awkward and uncomfortable, but it really does put an interesting focus on the conversation, which is we're both going to come out of this stronger and having grown from this experience. I will have grown having initiated a conversation that I felt was really uncomfortable, and you will grow because together we're going to help reshape that experience. Is that a way to kind of summarize it? Or
I think that's absolutely very true. I think that when I say that it's not having hard conversations, it's having humane and growth producing conversations.
Yeah, I love
Then
that.
people say, okay. And I say, and for some people, they have to work on the humane because they want to just say, you're a terrible teacher. This is just not working. And they're very too vague, kind of snarky about it. And then other people are like, oh no, I'm totally like going to make sure that I want to, but I'm then going to pussyfoot around stuff, and I'm not growth producing. I'm not growth producing because I don't feel comfortable saying things. And at that point, without clarity, you're not going to get anywhere. So an HR colleague and I were on the phone this morning, and she said, I just thought that when I told this particular colleague that he should be more present at the meetings, he would just pick that up. And I'm looking at her like, well, what does that mean? Like, has he been falling asleep? Has he been? And she goes, well, he's actually on the internet buying things. And I said, well, there you go. I don't think that would have even crossed my mind when you said be present, because it's so what, and she goes, well, I guess people noticed and that's what he's been doing. And I said, then that's what you have to say. Being present means you're not buying things on Zappos. You're not. And she's like, oh, it's just, and I'm like, I think if he's already there and he's doing it, naming it, don't be loud, just be specific, is going to be okay, And she's like, okay, but those are the two things. And I think it's about growth. I think it's about making sure that we want the next step, and not to think this is going to fracture the whole thing, or I'm having a hard conversation where I'm firing somebody. That
Yeah.
shouldn't be the first time that
Right.
you're having this conversation. There should have been many growth producing conversations along the way.
Right. Why? I'm wondering. Is it arrogance or insecurity that leads people to take a kind of authoritative approach and use their positional authority to just sort of short circuit these conversations? And I'm the boss, and this is the way. What do you think? Maybe it's a combination of both. I'm just sort of imagining that maybe it's an arrogance, maybe it's an insecurity. What leads us to, for some of us, to use our positional authority to just leverage that and get people to do what they're told to do?
My immediate thought is arrogance, but I wouldn't frame it that way.
Okay.
I think frustration. I think also it's a lot of work to
Fair.
do what I'm looking to do. And I
Yeah.
remember talking to an administrator who, when I posed these questions, like, what exactly, have you had a clarifying conversation? Have you framed the problem? Is it on their plate? What are the specifics? I'm a busy person. I don't have a lot of time to be thinking this through. The other adults should just already know better. And I said, but they're not. So okay. Well, I just still don't have that much time. And I said, and that's an arrogance piece, because this is, or a denial. So I said, how long have you had the problem? And he said, 2 years. So this person has been not doing whatever for the children, for the team. So I said, do you think that you've spent 20 minutes in the last 2 years venting, having a drink with somebody on a Friday afternoon, talking about this in a meeting with your supervisor or with your team or with a complaining somebody? 20 minutes, maybe not in a row, but 20 minutes have been used to not deal with this. When you need to put 20 minutes of brain work around it in this way, it's kind of tiring in a different way. And so I think it's just, it might not be arrogance. It's just frustration. And I didn't know. I was here for the kids, and I'm really going to have to learn how to grow the adults. And that is new. And it hurts. It hurts my brain. Hurts my brain.
Well, it makes you wonder, what is leadership if it is not leading the individuals, the teachers? If it's not being that leader and having those conversations, then what exactly are you leading if we're not engaged in those growth opportunities? Now, third scenario, and I don't know if you have any sort of twists or slight differences, but the third scenario would be where there is no power tilted one way or the other. This is a colleague, no positional authority. They're the same level of experience. We're in a department meeting, and they've been overly critical of a colleague, or they've done something. They've kind of crossed a line, and I have to have this difficult or challenging conversation that maybe they were a little harsh, and I have to sort of bring that conversation to the forefront. But I don't really. I'm not their boss. I'm not in there. They're not my supervisor. We're just colleagues. How do we approach that conversation?
I'm going to go back to clarity around norms. Number one,
Okay.
that we have agreed that this is how we work effectively together. Okay. So that's already should be on the table, and that we are there to help each other. Now, when somebody crosses the line, I don't think, go to exactly the depth that I was mentioning in these other conversations. I might have what I would call a quick script conversation, or even a one-liner conversation, and I'll talk about those, or a one-word conversation.
Okay.
And I call those sort of seize the moment. And I have people that say they're just nauseated thinking about even having a 3-sentence conversation. But do you think what just happened was emotionally damaging or professionally unsound? Then if that is the truth, then you have to say something. You could say, and this is to them individually,
right.
When you said this, this is how I felt. Be really helpful if you could do this instead. Takes three seconds, takes 8 seconds actually. And I have been my not best self in a situation. I rolled my eyes, I made a face, I was totally rude. And my friend Melissa came up to me and said, I'm sorry I didn't have that sheet, but when you rolled your eyes and you made a face, it was really disrespectful. And it would be just if you have a challenge with someone, could you just let me know privately? And, and that would be just helpful. Thank you. And she was absolutely in the right. And I looked at her, I said, you're right, I apologize. And she said, thank you. And it was separate, but it was a short conversation. Now, if I had done something and she wanted to be even faster on the uptake, she could have said to me, ouch, or that stung, mm-hmm. or that made me uncomfortable, mm-hmm. or I disagree, or that wasn't cool. And those things actually can be said, and maybe they're easier for some people. And so my colleague said she does ouch, because that at least stops the person right there in the moment, that there had been a line that had gone over, like you had been too obnoxious or snarky. And I had a group that they were the Owls. That was the name of their mascot. And so they brought an owl to the meeting, and they named the owl Norm. This is a true story. I'm not kidding. And when somebody crossed the line, somebody would just go, ooh, ooh. And that was their signal that was not cool. And right. I know that if there was a dragon or there was a leopard, you're not going to go, because that's just going to continue to exacerbate it. But it was that idea of we need to call each other on each other's stuff. And if that's already in the air, to just say, hey, that was a little like you could have said offsides, like you mentioned that. I assume you're a big hockey. That's cool. Any kind of code. No, my brother's the game announcer for the Minnesota Wild. So but it's that kind of stuff that I think we need to talk about, because we need to be grown-ups at work.
Right.
And that's
right. The difference between public and private. I'm thinking about, these immediate reactions where you say, ouch, or that was offside, or that stung. That's obviously going to be, if I'm at a department meeting, that's going to be very public. Whereas often we would have these conversations in private. So how do I know, how might I know when to have it public versus private, even assuming we've got the norms established and we know that this is ahead of time been established, that we're going to call each other on our sort of offside behavior? How would I, when would I make the decision to maybe save it for after the meeting or privately?
That's a tricky one. I think for me, it's more almost about how egregious that moment was, how comfortable I feel sharing that in front of the whole group. Is it really increasing the safety to say something for the whole group? Has it happened twice or 3 times in that, and I want to speak on behalf of the group? Is this somebody that is going to just be angrier if I call them out, and then be worse in front of the group? And so I want to deal with that person individually. I think it's just it's choices about my courage in the moment, my knowing the whole group, my knowing that person. I've met people that they will exacerbate if they're called out in front of the group. They feel shamed, as opposed to, you're right, that's cool, sorry, my bad. And then sort of be able to manage it. So, and I also think, like, have you modeled? Has anybody called you on it in front of the whole group, and you've modeled that this is how we respond? I don't know. I think it really depends. But I just know that she spoke to me individually, and that was that moment. I think depends on how clear the norms have been. I would maybe go individual with specific people who I'm very concerned will not take it well.
I think that, as you were responding there, I was kind of thinking the same thing, which is, one, what is their past practice, or do I know what's my relationship with them? How have they responded, when they've been called out publicly, will it make it worse? Will it be volatile?
Right,
How,
exactly.
right. And so knowing your colleagues would help you in understanding that, big picture here, this might be something to address after the fact as opposed to during. So yeah, some great advice, Jennifer. Certainly, I think there's, thinking through. I know that in both my personal and professional life, whenever difficult conversations come up and you have them and you work through them, you always come out the other end feeling stronger, with greater perspective, feeling as though these are not as big a deal as you might have made them out to be in your head. So I really appreciate that. I want to pivot now to, as we sort of finish up, talking a little bit about your latest book, which is sort of in various stages of being out. The e-copies are out, but it's in print. And so listeners, it's at some point you'll be able to access it in many ways, but stretching your learning edges, growing up at work. So I think we all need to grow up at work. But the book, as you say, is organized around 5 facets of personal and professional growth. So what are they, and how do we all grow up at work?
So the growing up at work, I don't want it to sound diminishing. That's okay, because
Yeah.
it's like, grow up. Okay,
No.
it's sort of a cheeky take on that,
Yeah.
but it's really about how we can develop as adults and the benefit of our personal development really supporting the collective.
Mhm.
And that I've noticed that, as I mentioned previously, we don't have credentials in how to talk effectively to adults. Yet the research, the John Hattie research, the Brake and Schneider research, the Hargraves and
Mhm.
O'Connor research, the PLC research, is really that the collective, when we work together, can increase student achievement. And it's really shown that if we do it well, it really has a much greater likelihood to do that. But we all know that we as individuals show up for that team meeting, right?
Mhm.
We are the collective. And sometimes we are not as grown up as we could be. And I started with myself. When my father passed away 3 years ago, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm the elder.
Mhm.
I have to be the adult. Like, I better grow up. And so these 5 facets, I think, are places where I've noticed we need to grow ourselves. And it's not an indulgence. It's really important that we focus on human development, not just child development. One is in knowing our identity, our identities, knowing our biases, our limitations, how our past influences our present and our work in teams. One is to be able to suspend certainty, to not just be an advocate, but to inquire, to recognize we don't know it all, and to suspend certainty and to say, what am I missing? And to do it with one of the other facets is with a sense of resilience, to build our resilience, to really go, okay, that is new and that was painful to hear, or this isn't something I'm aware of and I need to grow. And I'm not going to feel so wounded by that or defensive in response to that, but I'm going to build up my stomach and my bandwidth to be able to engage this way. So know your identity, suspend certainty, build resiliency. And then the fourth is take responsibility. Take responsibility, not just for your work product, but for how you talk to other people, which is, if you have to ask for help, how do you seek clarification in focused and agile ways, not to complain that the other person is just, I don't even understand what they're doing, but to seek out the clarification. And to, if you have a concern, stay in a place of concern before you even head to complaint.
Right.
Concern and complaint are different, and how to have a hard conversation. And that all really extends to this whole 5th facet, which is engage in reciprocity. And to engage in reciprocity means that you are a part of a team of adults and they are a part of yours, and you are a value add to them, and they are a value add to you, and that you need to build up your skill set to be able to do that in mutually respectful ways with all the adults that you work with.
Mhm.
That type of growing up is something that I didn't learn as I was inducted into the profession. And I was, as I said, talking to a colleague in HR today who was like, and the veteran colleagues that are really challenging sometimes don't have those skill sets. And so this book is got self-assessments and continuums and self-talk and exercises and videos and text readings about those 5 pieces that I think are really about what it means to be a professional
Right.
and to engage as a collaborative professional with each other.
Yeah. Well, what do you mean by your identity? What do you mean by know my identity? What does that look like?
So I I've used an identity circle in my work where you show up in your role, but all of you shows up. Uh, your race, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, your
Okay.
gender, your country of origin, your country, your host country if you're not in the same country, your whether you're married, whether you have caregiving uh, obligations, your socioeconomic status, your English as a second or additional language, or are you an English speaker and you're working in an English speaking school? All of that arrives. And sometimes we're blind to how those facets or pieces of us or dimensions of our identities impact our teaching or our collaboration. We think,
Mm.
well, isn't everybody like this or isn't everybody like that? And I know. And I think working in international schools made me very much wake up to the fact that I was a US citizen. When I'm in the US, I'm very much reminded that I'm from California.
Mhm.
When I'm in when I'm in a room, I will also notice that I am white, I am a woman, I am, and how does that play out in the dynamics of my teaching, my facilitation? I'm working with a British school in Taipei on Wednesday night. I am a US citizen from California and how, they were raised in England or in the UK. They're working in Taipei. I'm phoning in literally from the US. How is all of that playing? And to even know that it is playing, I think for some people is hugely not a part of it. No, I'm teaching math. What are you talking about? I don't need to. The answer is, yeah, it is actually showing up, and it's showing up in teams. And as we're working in the US, and I think also in Canada, and many other places in the world, to confront systemic inequities, to look at issues of race and inclusion and belonging, that's a conversation that we need to be having with ourselves, not just in teams.
Yeah, for sure. The all of those different aspects of our identity and how they contribute to the conversations and that level of awareness, just having the awareness around just yourself as also the surroundings with whom you are engaged in conversation can be a big part of that for sure. I'm also wondering about reciprocity, and you make me think of someone who's early in their career who may be working, say, within a department or a grade level team where they're surrounded by veterans. There's 15, 20-year veteran teachers, and I'm in my third year. And you say, I've add value, they add value to me. How does that balance out? Is there real reciprocity in that situation? And if so, what does that look like?
Yeah. I would start with, and it'd be tricky if you, as the third year teacher, were saying, I think we need to engage in reciprocity. If they've never had a conversation amongst themselves, regardless of a third year teacher coming in, that they need to have the skills and capacities to be really effective group members with each other.
Mhm.
So are we listening to each other? Are we seeking support from each other? Are we asking questions that trust in the capacity of other people so that we're supporting each other's development? Are we offering suggestions and not, this is what I think you should do,
Mhm.
kind of stuff? And does the team engage in reciprocity, meaning they believe that the others are of value add to them and they're of value add? And then the third year colleague can maybe feel more equal.
Mhm.
That is a tricky situation. And I would suggest people go to the multi-generational workplace, because people are like, people, I mean, and it's just a silly, uh, cheeky answer, but I am 54, and I found out today that 40 people are retiring from my district for a variety of reasons. They won't hire as many because of monies and all that. But that probably, I'm going to guess, is 30 new teachers are coming in. That is a shift in culture.
Yeah.
That is a shift in conversation. And so if we engage in reciprocity, those added individuals will be brought on board and inducted into a culture where that is the conversation. We all learn from each other. This younger person who's 24, 30 years younger than me, is a value add to me, and I can be a value add to them to bring
Right.
them into the culture I know. But that's tricky dynamics and status, and um, there's just the need. There's just so we could go in. This could go on for forever. I could go into the smart model with you. I could
Right.
go into
Well, we'll have you
overt.
back. We'll dig into that another next time we have you on, Jennifer. That's for
I
sure.
know.
You know, you make me
Sorry.
think about it being incumbent upon the veteran teachers to actively create that environment where you look at the third year teacher and you purposefully ask them for their input, and you create a
That's right.
habit around that conversation so they do feel, because they feel valued, because the easiest thing for all of the veteran teachers to do is just sit around and say, just listen, you know, we've been through it before, and be sort of dismissive and marginalizing that newer teacher, when in fact they may have a lot to contribute about from their experience as well. I want to finish up today with just teachers in general. Most educators I know are incredibly tough on themselves, and certainly during COVID, this has been a time where, you know, the general public has been at times very supportive of educators, and at times incredibly tough on the
Yeah.
expectations for educators. The external demands, though, rarely come close, from my experience, they rarely come close to matching the internal expectations that teachers have of themselves. So what are some ways, strategies, mindsets, what are some ways teachers can go easy on themselves to know that, yes, there is still much to be done, but there has been much accomplished? Like how do we, what are some ways teachers can just take it easy on themselves and not be so hard on themselves around expectations?
I I think that we do not celebrate what's working as much as, and this is human nature, okay?
Mhm.
Uh, what's working as opposed to noticing what's wrong, okay? So I want people to celebrate at least, I mean, when I'm coaching them, you know, what are 5 amazing things that you contributed to? You were present, you sent an email, you know, were right there to help this one particular person, you wrote a thank you note. Something about, you need to celebrate the good. I have a tendency not to celebrate the good, and to do a pat on the back. But I also know that in self-assessments, I need to say to myself, have I demonstrated personal regard for people? Yeah, I have. Good. That's contributed to the culture. Have I demonstrated a show of integrity and really shown up as best I can? Yep, that's good for the community. Have I as best I can, learned how to be competent in this new place called online hybrid instruction that I sure as heck 10 months ago didn't have a clue about. Yep.
Right.
Then you've contributed. And so sort of pat on the back around stuff and to self-assess with celebration. And I often know people are hard on themselves, but I'm loving that as we're concluding, they're going to start to do, stuff outside my window. So thank God we're in it. Here we go.
It's all good.
It's all, but just to do a quick celebration, yay me, pat on the back, 10 things that went really well today. Yeah. And I bet you'll find them, and they don't have to be big. So that's what I have to do myself. And maybe I need to.
That's right. It is hard for people who have committed their careers to serving others, right? When you've got teachers who've committed their lives to teaching other people's children, it's hard to look at ourselves and celebrate the successes when we're always striving, because there is no perfect. Perfect is unattainable, and yet teachers so often put that kind of pressure on themselves. Great, a fascinating conversation, Jennifer. And as I said, I think that that the growing up, which I love the cheekiness of the title, and listeners, you'll see in the title that up is in parentheses. So it's not you need to grow up. It's not a juvenile attack or attack on the juvenile nature. It is us growing up. I think we'll have to have you back to talk a little bit about those facets more. But we're going to finish up today with a segment I call 3 questions. I'm going to ask you 3 fun questions. Take them where you want to go. It gives people a chance to get to know you a little bit. And then I've got one final question as we wrap up today. So here's the first one. It's a would you rather. Would you rather stub your toe or get a paper cut?
Stub my toe.
Stub your toe. Okay. Any particular reason you made that choice?
Because that will be over sooner, and the paper cuts are always on my fingers, and I will have to neosporin it, and I'll see it. Mm-hmm. I just don't want to see it. I'd rather swear, hold it, and then it's going to be easy. It's just easier. It's less painful in the end.
In the long run, for sure. That's right. Because there is nothing quite like the pain of stubbing your toe on one of the 4 posts of your bed. That is next level pain.
I hate it. But then I swear, and then it's over pretty fast.
Absolutely. Great. Second question. What's your favorite movie genre? What movies do you love?
Oh, probably dramas. But then you're going to ask about my favorite drama or something, and I'm not going to be able to give you an answer right now. But
how about one of them?
Oh, God. Older movies, fine movie, Terms of Endearment, Dead Poets Society, things like that. Those are some of the older, but the minute I get off this call, I'm going to go, oh, why didn't I say this? Why didn't I say this?
Good. Dead Poets Society, let's not call that an old movie, just so that we're not. Take it easy on the old movies there.
I was going to get my master's in education.
Yeah.
The summer that I think I saw that movie. So it came out when I was 22. So it's 32 years old.
I know. I know. It is hard to believe those movies from the early 90s, are 30 years ago. And it's incredible. Last question here. Fiction or nonfiction, you can pick. What book do you wish you had written?
Middlemarch.
Oh, okay. Tell us about that. I'm not familiar.
By George Eliot. It's an epic 800-page book. I was an English major. By George Eliot, in which she goes into a village and just it's like a soap opera, and she's so generous for so long about each one of these people. And I mean, it's like Dickensian. I mean, it's just all of these people, and I got sucked into it. And the idea that she was so generous and understanding of all of those people is just, I would like to have been her. So
Interesting.
yeah.
I've never read the book. I
Oh,
may have to pick that up. 800 pages, probably going to take me 3 years to read it, but
yeah, I
hey.
don't worry. But that's my immediate thought. It's just she got you in. It was
Yeah.
political. It was
Mhm.
intimate. It was amazing. I
Fantastic.
don't know. I was a nerd at that time, so I read it.
Love that. All right, one final question. Certainly, I've asked all guests on the podcast about the question about success and happiness. And the question, as I always ask, is this: if a random person stopped you on the street and asked you, "What's your definition of success?" how would you answer them?
I would say I was a success if I made if my work made a difference, and I slept at night knowing that I was doing good work in the world. So
Hmm.
that's success, is sleeping at night and knowing that I made a difference to others.
Yeah, yeah, I love that, and certainly being able to sleep at night, both uh, specifically and maybe metaphorically,
Yes.
is a great way to think about the idea of success and how that translates into what we've accomplished both professionally and personally.
Yeah.
I certainly appreciate that. Listeners, you should definitely follow Jennifer on Twitter. Her Twitter handle is at Jennifer Abrams. On Instagram, it's at Jennifer Beth Abrams. You can follow Jennifer also on Facebook and LinkedIn. Jennifer Abrams, both on Facebook and LinkedIn. And Jennifer's website is www.jenniferabrams.com. Jennifer, thanks so much for joining me today. I look forward to next time.
Thank you.